Claire Simmons knelt on the carpet, her hands trembling as she held the small flashlight toward the little girl's face. "Tell me if you feel anything, sweetheart," she whispered. Emma sat perfectly still, her blind eyes staring at nothing, just like they always did. Just like they had for 5 years. Then she blinked. Once. Twice. And in a voice so fragile it barely existed, the child who never spoke said 4 words that would destroy everything. "I think I saw a light, Mommy." Claire's heart stopped, because Emma Hartwell had been diagnosed completely blind since birth. Every doctor confirmed it. Every specialist agreed. But what if they were all wrong? What if someone had been lying this whole time? Before we continue with this incredible story, please subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and stay with us until the very end. And comment below. Tell us what city you're watching from. We love knowing how far these stories travel. Now let's go back to where it all began. Richard Hartwell stood at the window of his study watching the autumn leaves fall across the Hudson Valley estate. His reflection stared back at him, a man who looked 60 but was only 44. Gray had overtaken his beard. Dark circles lived permanently beneath his eyes. His shoulders, once squared with confidence, now curved inward, like a man carrying invisible weight. Behind him, somewhere in this massive house, his daughter sat alone. She was always alone. "Mr. Hartwell." Richard didn't turn around. "What is it, Margaret?" His housekeeper stepped into the doorway. "The new candidate is here, for the housekeeping position. Send her away." "Sir, this is the 9th person we've interviewed this month. We need someone." Richard finally turned. "I said send her away." Margaret didn't move. She'd worked for Richard for 12 years, long enough to know when to push back. "Her name is Claire Simmons. She's different from the others. They're all different until they meet Emma. Then they can't wait to leave. She lost a child recently, sir, a newborn." Richard's jaw tightened. He said nothing. "I think," Margaret continued carefully, "she might understand this house better than most." The silence stretched between them. Outside, a crow called from somewhere in the oak trees. "Fine," Richard finally said. "Send her in." Claire Simmons sat in the formal living room, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She'd never seen a house this large. The ceiling stretched impossibly high. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls. Paintings that probably cost more than her entire life earnings lined the walls. But the house felt wrong. It was too quiet, too still, like a museum where no one was allowed to breathe. She heard footsteps approaching and straightened her posture. A man appeared in the doorway, tall, thin, wearing clothes that probably cost thousands, but hung on him like he'd lost weight he never gained back. His eyes met hers, and Claire saw something she recognized immediately. Grief, the kind that never leaves. "Miss Simmons?" It wasn't a greeting, it was an assessment. "Mr. Hartwell, thank you for seeing me." He walked past her without responding and sat in the chair across from hers. He didn't offer coffee. He didn't smile. He simply stared at her like she was a problem he needed to solve. "Your resume says you have no formal experience in estate management." "That's correct. No references from wealthy families." "No. No training in specialized childcare." "No, sir." Richard leaned back. "Then why exactly are you here?" Claire met his gaze directly. "Because I need work, Mr. Hartwell. Honest work. I'm not looking to impress anyone or build a career in mansion housekeeping. I just need a place to be useful. There are easier places. I'm not looking for easy." Richard studied her. She was younger than he expected, maybe late 20s. Her clothes were clean but simple. Her hair was pulled back, practically not stylishly. No jewelry except a thin silver band on her right hand. But it was her eyes that held him. They were steady, calm, and underneath that calm, something wounded but unbroken. "My daughter lives here," he said abruptly. "Emma, she's 5 years old." "I know. She was born blind." "Yes. She doesn't speak much. She doesn't play. She doesn't respond to most people. The last 3 housekeepers quit within a month because they found her." He paused, searching for the word disturbing. Claire didn't flinch. Children aren't disturbing, Mr. Hartwell. They're honest. You haven't met Emma? No, but I've met grief. I imagine she's met it too. Richard's expression flickered just for a moment before the walls came back up. What do you know about grief? Claire was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady but soft. I buried my daughter 3 months ago. She was 11 days old. The doctors couldn't tell me why she died. Sometimes they said it just happens. She looked down at her hands. I came here because my apartment still smells like baby powder and I can't make it stop. I came here because I need to be somewhere else. Anywhere else. The room fell completely silent. Richard didn't offer sympathy. He didn't say he was sorry. Instead, he asked a question that surprised them both. When you lost her, did you blame yourself? Claire looked up. Every minute of every day. Richard nodded slowly, as if she'd passed some test he hadn't known he was giving. You can start Monday. Claire arrived at the Hartwell estate at 7 in the morning, carrying one small suitcase. Margaret met her at the service entrance and led her through the back halls to a modest bedroom on the 3rd floor. This will be your room, bathroom down the hall, kitchen access anytime. Mr. Hartwell takes his meals in his study. He doesn't like company. Emma eats in the small dining room. She has a nurse who handles her morning routine and a therapist who comes 3 times a week, but neither of them stay long. Claire set her suitcase on the bed. Why not? Margaret hesitated. Emma doesn't connect. The therapist says she's non-responsive. The nurse says she's difficult, but between you and me, she lowered her voice. That child isn't difficult. She's lonely. There's a difference. Has anyone told Mr. Hartwell that you don't tell Richard Hartwell anything? You wait until he figures it out himself. Margaret handed her a cleaning schedule. Stay out of Emma's room unless absolutely necessary. Don't try to engage with her. The specialists say direct interaction can be overwhelming. Just clean, organize, and keep your head down. Claire took the schedule. Understood. But as Margaret left, Claire looked out the window toward the wing where she'd been told Emma's room was located. A small face appeared briefly in one of the windows, pale, expressionless, staring at nothing. Then it was gone. 3 days passed before Claire saw Emma up close. She was dusting the hallway outside the music room when she heard a sound so faint she almost missed it. Humming. Soft, tuneless humming coming from the other side of the door. Claire stopped. Listened. The humming continued, not a song, exactly more like someone trying to remember a melody that had been forgotten long ago. Slowly, Claire pushed the door open. Emma sat on the floor in a patch of sunlight holding a threadbare teddy bear. Her eyes were open but unfocused, staring at the wall. She was small for 5, fragile, almost translucent, with dark hair that fell across her face. She wore a simple white dress, and her feet were bare. The humming stopped the moment Claire entered. I'm sorry, Claire said softly. I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm Claire. I work here now. Emma didn't respond, didn't move, didn't acknowledge Claire's existence in any way. Claire should have left. Margaret had told her not to engage. The specialists had warned against direct interaction. Instead, she sat down on the floor, keeping a respectful distance. That's a nice teddy bear, she said. Does he have a name? Nothing. When I was little, I had a stuffed rabbit. His name was Mr. Buttons because he was missing one eye, and I had to sew a button there instead. Claire smiled at the memory. He wasn't very pretty, but I loved him. Emma's fingers tightened slightly on the bear. Just slightly, Claire noticed. I'm going to finish dusting now, she said, standing slowly, but I'll be around, if you ever want to say hello. She moved to the doorway, then paused. The sun feels nice in here, doesn't it? I can feel it even from over here. She left without expecting a response. But behind her, Emma's head turned just barely toward the window where the sunlight was streaming in. Over the next 2 weeks, Claire established a quiet routine. She cleaned, she organized, she stayed out of the way when the therapist came and the nurse did her rounds. She didn't try to force conversations with Emma, but she paid attention. She noticed that Emma always sat near windows during certain hours when the sun was brightest. She noticed that Emma's head would turn slightly when someone entered a room, tracking sounds with remarkable precision. She noticed that Emma's fingers moved constantly, touching textures, feeling surfaces, as if trying to understand the world through her hands. "She's very aware," Claire mentioned to Margaret one evening. Margaret was folding linens in the utility room. "The blind often are. Their other senses compensate. It's more than that. She knows when people are watching her. She knows when the light changes." Margaret looked up sharply. "What do you mean when the light changes?" "I mean—" Claire paused, unsure how to explain. "Yesterday I opened a curtain in the hallway. Emma was in the next room around the corner, completely out of sight. But the moment I opened it, she stopped moving, like she felt it somehow. She probably heard the curtain. Maybe." But Claire wasn't convinced. It happened 3 weeks into her employment. Claire was in Emma's room cleaning the shelves by the window. Emma sat in her usual spot on the rug, holding the teddy bear, rocking slightly. Claire had learned to work quietly around her, moving slowly, never making sudden sounds. She'd also learned to talk, not to Emma exactly, but around her. Soft commentary about nothing important. "These books are dusty. Someone should read them to you more often. This one's about a rabbit, not like Mr. Buttons, but similar. He goes on adventures." Emma didn't respond. She never did. Claire moved to dust behind a wooden chest, reaching into the shadow, and her hand touched something hard. She pulled it out. A small wooden box. Inside were a dozen glass bottles, each labeled with careful handwriting. Eye drops, dated going back years. Claire frowned. She picked up one of the bottles and read the label. "Cyclopentylate compound, custom formulation, Dr. Marcus Whitmore." She didn't recognize the name, but something about the bottles bothered her. They were old but clearly well used, the labels worn, the glass smudged with fingerprints. Why would a blind child need eye drops? And why were they hidden behind furniture? "Claire!" The voice was so soft, so unexpected, that Claire nearly dropped the bottle. She spun around. Emma was looking at her. Not past her, not through her, at her. For the first time, those unfocused eyes seemed to actually see. "Emma," Claire whispered. "Did you just say my name?" Emma's lips moved, but no sound came out. Then she turned her head away, and the moment was gone. Claire stood frozen, her heart pounding. She looked down at the bottles in her hand. Something was very, very wrong. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She sat at the small desk in her room, her laptop open, searching for information. She'd photographed the bottle labels with her phone, and now she was typing the ingredients into medical databases, research journals, anything she could find. Cyclopentylate anticholinergic compound used in ophthalmology to dilate pupils and paralyze accommodation. Normal use short-term diagnostic procedures. But this formulation was different. The concentration was much higher than standard doses, and there were other compounds mixed in, things Claire didn't recognize, but that her searches linked to pupillary suppression and light sensitivity reduction. In high doses administered long-term, especially in children, Claire stopped reading. Her hands were shaking. The research articles were clinical detached, but the implications were horrifying. Prolonged use of these compounds could suppress normal pupillary response, could reduce light sensitivity, could in extreme cases simulate the symptoms of blindness in a child whose eyes were actually functional. But that would mean no. It was impossible. Why would anyone do that? Why would a doctor deliberately blind a child? Claire closed the laptop. She was jumping to conclusions. She had no medical training, no expertise. She was a housekeeper who'd read some articles online. But she couldn't shake the image of Emma's head turning toward the window, of Emma's eyes following movement in ways that didn't make sense, of Emma saying her name. 2 days later, Claire decided to test her theory. She waited until the house was quiet, Richard in his study, the nurse gone for the day. She found Emma in the music room again, sitting in her usual patch of sunlight. "Hi, Emma," Claire said softly, sitting down nearby. "Is it okay if I sit with you?" No response. Claire pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight function. Her heart was racing. This is crazy, she thought. I'm looking for something that isn't there. But she had to know. Slowly, carefully, she aimed the light toward the far wall, not at Emma, just near her field of vision. The beam created a bright spot on the wallpaper. Emma didn't react. Claire moved the light slightly to the left. Nothing. She was about to give up when she noticed something. Emma's eyes, those unfocused, blind eyes, had shifted. Barely perceptibly, but definitely. They had moved toward the light. Claire's breath caught. She moved the light again, this time slowly, sweeping it across Emma's peripheral vision. Emma's eyes followed. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't wishful thinking. Emma's eyes were tracking the light. Claire's hands trembled as she turned off the flashlight. Her mind was racing. Emma wasn't completely blind. She couldn't be. Blind eyes don't track light sources. They don't respond to brightness changes. Everything Claire had observed, the window sitting the head, turns the awareness of people entering rooms, it all pointed to the same impossible conclusion. Emma could see something. Maybe not much. Maybe barely anything. But something. And if that was true, then why had every doctor diagnosed her as completely blind? Why had she been on those eye drops for 5 years? Claire looked at the little girl sitting in the sunlight clutching her teddy bear and felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. Someone had done this deliberately. Someone had stolen this child's sight. That evening, Claire did something she knew could get her fired. She went to Richard's study and knocked on the door. "Mr. Hartwell, I need to speak with you." "Not now, Miss Simmons. It's about Emma." A long pause. Then, "Come in." Richard was sitting behind his desk, surrounded by papers he clearly wasn't reading. He looked exhausted, more so than usual. "What about Emma?" he asked, not looking up. Claire stepped closer. "How long has she been on the eye drops?" Richard's pen stopped moving. "What?" "The eye drops. The ones in the bottles behind the chest in her room. How long has she been taking them?" Now, Richard looked up. His expression was unreadable. "How do you know about those?" "I found them while cleaning. I looked up the ingredients." "Mr. Hartwell, those are prescribed medication," Richard interrupted. "Dr. Whitmore has been Emma's ophthalmologist since birth. The drops manage her ocular pressure and prevent further degeneration. Have you ever had them tested by another doctor?" Richard's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me. I think—" Claire stopped, gathered her courage, and continued. "I think Emma might not be completely blind." The silence that followed was suffocating. "Get out," Richard said quietly. "Mr. Hartwell, please." I said, "Get out." His voice cracked like a whip. "My daughter has been examined by specialists from Johns Hopkins Cleveland Clinic and the Mayo Clinic. Her optic nerve is underdeveloped. Her retinal response is minimal. She was born blind, Miss Simmons. I've spent 5 years and millions of dollars trying to find another answer, and there isn't one. But I've seen her respond to light. You've seen what you wanted to see." Richard stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're a housekeeper who lost her child, and now you're projecting hope onto mine. I understand grief, Miss Simmons. I live with it every single day. But I won't let you give me false hope. Not about this. Not about her." Claire held her ground. "I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to test it. Stop the drops for a few days, just a few days, see if anything changes." "Those drops are prescribed medication. Stopping them could damage what little function she has. Or it could reveal function that's been suppressed." Richard stared at her. His hands were shaking. "You're fired," he said. "Mr. Hartwell, you're fired. Pack your things and be gone by morning." Claire's heart sank, but she didn't look away. "Fine. Fire me. But before I go, please just watch her. Really watch her. Watch how she turns toward windows. Watch how her head tracks sounds with perfect accuracy. Watch her eyes when light changes in the room, and ask yourself, does she really seem like someone who can't see anything at all?" She left without waiting for a response. Claire packed her suitcase that night. She'd known it was a risk. She'd known she might lose everything. But she couldn't shake the image of Emma's eyes following that light. She was almost finished packing when a soft knock came at her door. "Come in." It was Margaret. The older woman's face was pale. "Mr. Hartwell wants to see you." "I thought I was fired." something happened. Claire followed Margaret through the darkened halls to the music room. The lights were on, unusual for this hour. Through the doorway, she could see Richard kneeling on the floor, his back to her, and in front of him, sitting in the middle of the room, was Emma. She was looking at her father, actually looking at him. "Emma," Richard was saying, his voice breaking. "Emma, can you see me?" The little girl reached out one small hand and touched his face. "Daddy?" she whispered. "You have gray in your beard." Richard made a sound, something between a sob and a laugh. He grabbed his daughter and held her tight, his whole body shaking. Claire stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Behind her, Margaret whispered, "He stopped giving her the drops. 2 hours ago he stopped." Richard looked up and saw Claire. His eyes were red, his face wet. "How did you know?" he asked hoarsely. Claire shook her head. "I didn't know. I just paid attention." Richard stood slowly still, holding Emma's hand like he was afraid to let go. "Don't leave," he said. "Please, I need to understand what's happening. I need—" His voice broke. "I need help." Claire looked at the little girl who was blinking at the lights like she was seeing them for the first time, who was looking at her father's face with wonder. 5 years. Someone had stolen 5 years from this child, and now it was time to find out who and why. "I'm not going anywhere," Claire said. The next 48 hours changed everything in the Hartwell mansion. Emma woke the morning after the drops were stopped and immediately asked a question she had never asked before. "Why is the ceiling so high?" Richard nearly collapsed. He sat on the edge of her bed and watched his daughter's eyes move, tracking the patterns of light coming through the curtains, studying the shapes of furniture, looking at things she had supposedly never seen. "Emma," he said carefully, "what else can you see?" She squinted at him, her brow furrowing with concentration. "Your face is fuzzy, but I can see it. I can see you're sad." Richard grabbed her and held her so tight she squeaked in protest. He was crying, deep, shaking sobs that he couldn't control. 5 years. 5 years he had believed his daughter lived in total darkness. 5 years he had whispered goodnight to a child he thought would never see his face. And now she was looking at him, really looking, telling him she could see that he was sad. Claire stood in the doorway watching. She had barely slept. Her mind kept racing through possibilities, explanations, accusations. Someone had done this. Someone had deliberately kept this child in darkness. And that someone had a name, Dr. Marcus Whitmore. "Mr. Hartwell," she said softly, "we need to talk. There's more you need to know." Richard looked up, his face streaked with tears. "Not now. I just want to be with her." "I understand. But every hour we wait is an hour that man stays free." Richard's expression hardened. He kissed Emma's forehead and stood up. "Margaret will stay with you, sweetheart. Daddy has to take care of something important." "Will you come back?" "I will always come back." He followed Claire out of the room, and as soon as the door closed, his grief transformed into something darker, something cold and focused. "Tell me everything," he said. They went to his study. Claire spread her research across his desk, printouts from medical journals, photographs of the bottle labels, notes she had taken over the past weeks. Richard read through everything in silence, his jaw tightening with each page. "This compound," Claire said, pointing to the chemical formula she had highlighted. "It's not a standard treatment. The concentration is 3 times higher than normal therapeutic doses. And these other ingredients," she pointed to another section, "they're documented to suppress pupillary response and reduce light sensitivity. Long-term use in children can simulate blindness even when the eyes are structurally normal." Richard looked up slowly. "Are you telling me my daughter could see all along? I'm saying her blindness may have been induced, or at least maintained artificially. But the specialists, Johns Hopkins Cleveland Clinic, they all confirmed she was blind. They examined a child who had been on these drops since birth. By the time they tested her, the medication had already suppressed her natural responses. They were measuring what the drugs created, not what she was born with." Richard sat back heavily in his chair. His hands were trembling. Why would he do this?" I don't know yet, but we need to find out. We need to have these drops tested by an independent lab, and we need to find Dr. Whitmore. Richard stared at the papers on his desk. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I trusted him. Victoria chose him before she died. She researched pediatric ophthalmologists for weeks. She said he was the best. She said our baby would be in good hands. Claire felt a chill run down her spine. How did your wife find him? A referral. Someone recommended him. Richard closed his eyes, trying to remember. A colleague of hers, I think. Someone from her charity work. Do you remember who? No, Victoria handled all of that. I was traveling constantly for work back then. I wasn't... His voice cracked. I wasn't there enough. And then she died, and suddenly I was alone with a newborn who couldn't see, and Whitmore was the only person who seemed to know what to do. Claire processed this information. The wife had found the doctor. The wife had died. And then Richard, overwhelmed with grief, and a disabled child, had relied entirely on the doctor's guidance. It was almost too convenient. We need to find out more about Dr. Whitmore, she said, where he came from, where he is now, and who else he might have treated. Richard nodded slowly. Then he picked up his phone and made a call. Thomas, I need you at the house. Now, bring everything you have on a man named Marcus Whitmore. Medical license, practice history, lawsuits, anything you can find. He paused. Yes, I'm serious. This is priority 1. He hung up and looked at Claire. Thomas Chen is my chief legal counsel. If there's dirt on this man, he'll find it. How long will that take? A few hours, maybe less. Richard stood and walked to the window, looking out at the estate he had built to keep the world away. All these years, I thought I was protecting her. I thought I was doing everything right. I followed every instruction, gave her every medication, hired every specialist. And the whole time someone was... He couldn't finish the sentence. You didn't know, Claire said. You couldn't have known. I should have questioned it. I should have looked closer. Grief makes us blind, Mr. Hartwell. Sometimes we're so focused on surviving that we can't see what's right in front of us. Richard turned to look at her. How did you see it? You've been here less than a month. Claire was quiet for a moment. Because I was looking for something to save. After I lost my daughter, I felt like my whole purpose had been ripped away. When I came here and saw Emma, this little girl sitting alone in the dark, I couldn't just walk past her. I had to look, really look. And once I started looking, I couldn't stop. Richard's expression softened slightly. Thank you for not walking past her. Don't thank me yet. We still don't know the full truth. Thomas Chen arrived 2 hours later carrying a laptop and a thick folder of documents. He was a sharp-eyed man in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of face that revealed nothing. I pulled everything I could find, he said, spreading papers across Richard's desk. Dr. Marcus Whitmore, licensed to practice in New York from 1998 to 2015, board-certified pediatric ophthalmologist, practiced at 3 different clinics before opening his own private practice in 2008. Why did his license end in 2015? Richard asked. Thomas's expression darkened. Suspended. The state medical board received multiple complaints about his treatment protocols. 3 families filed malpractice suits alleging their children had been misdiagnosed or improperly treated. The cases were all settled privately before going to trial. Settled how? Confidentially. The families received substantial payments in exchange for signing non-disclosure agreements. Whitmore surrendered his license voluntarily as part of the settlement. No criminal charges were ever filed. Claire leaned forward. What happened to the children? Thomas flipped through his notes. I couldn't find detailed medical records, those are protected. But I did find some news articles from local papers at the time. One mentioned a 6-year-old boy whose vision miraculously improved after his family stopped using medication prescribed by Whitmore. Another referenced a lawsuit filed by parents who claimed their daughter's blindness was unnecessarily prolonged by improper treatment. Richard's face had gone white. He did this to other children. He made them blind or kept them blind, and no one stopped him. The settlements prevented public disclosure, and without criminal charges there was no permanent record. He essentially disappeared. Where is he now? Thomas hesitated. That's where it gets complicated. After surrendering his license in New York, he moved to several different states. I found records of him applying for medical licenses in Florida, Texas, and Arizona, all under slightly different versions of his name. Marcus Whitmore, Mark Whitmore, M.D. Whitmore. And the states let him practice. Medical licensing boards don't always communicate effectively. If he didn't disclose his New York history, and if no one checked thoroughly, he could have slipped through the cracks. Claire felt sick. So he might still be practicing somewhere, still doing this to children. Possibly, but his trail goes cold about 3 years ago. The last address I have for him is in Scottsdale, Arizona, but when I called the building, they said the suite has been vacant for 18 months. Richard slammed his hand on the desk. Find him. Whatever it costs, whatever resources you need, find him. Richard, I should warn you. I don't want warnings. I want answers. My daughter spent 5 years in darkness because of this man. He's going to answer for it. Thomas nodded slowly. I'll put my best investigators on it. But there's something else you should consider. What? Going public. If we file a lawsuit, it becomes part of the public record. Other families might come forward. Other victims might be found. Richard considered this. Not yet. I want to know everything before we go public. I want to know why he did this, what he was getting out of it. Money, probably. The pharmaceutical connection. What pharmaceutical connection? Thomas pulled another document from his folder. This is where it gets interesting. I found financial records suggesting Whitmore received payments from 3 different pharmaceutical companies over the years. The payments are listed as consulting fees, but the amounts don't match typical consulting arrangements. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. Claire's mind was racing. The eye drops, the custom formulations. What if he was testing experimental compounds on his patients? Thomas nodded grimly. That's my suspicion. Unauthorized clinical trials using children as test subjects. The pharmaceutical companies get their data. Whitmore gets paid and no one asks questions because the children are already diagnosed as blind. Richard stood abruptly and walked to the window. His whole body was rigid with rage. He used my daughter as a laboratory rat. We don't have definitive proof yet, Thomas cautioned, but the pattern is there. Then get me proof. Get me something I can take to a prosecutor. Richard turned back to face them. And I want those eye drops tested. Independent laboratory. Full analysis. I want to know exactly what's in them. I'll arrange it today. After Thomas left, Richard and Claire sat in silence for a long time. The weight of what they were uncovering pressed down on both of them. I keep thinking about Victoria, Richard finally said. She chose him, she trusted him, and then she died, and I never thought to question her choice. How did your wife die? Claire asked carefully. Helicopter crash. She was traveling to a charity event upstate. The weather turned bad and the pilot tried to push through it. Richard's voice was flat, mechanical. She was killed instantly. The pilot survived. I'm sorry. It was 10 days after Emma was born. 10 days. I had a newborn with special needs, a wife to bury, and a business to run. I couldn't function. Whitmore was the one who helped me through those first months. He came to the house personally, showed me how to administer Emma's medication, helped me set up her care routine. I thought he was a saint. Claire processed this new information. The doctor hadn't just prescribed medication, he had embedded himself in the family during their most vulnerable moment. He had made himself indispensable. Did you ever wonder why he was so involved? She asked. House calls personal attention that's unusual for a specialist. Richard's expression shifted. At the time, I just thought he was being kind. Victoria had been one of his supporters. She'd donated to his research foundation before Emma was born. I assumed he felt a special connection to our family. Wait, Victoria donated to his research foundation? Yes. She was passionate about children's health causes. She gave to several organizations. Do you have records of those donations? Richard frowned. Probably. Her financial records from that time are still archived. Why? Because if Victoria was financially connected to Whitmore before Emma was born, that changes things. It suggests a relationship that predates Emma's diagnosis. Richard went to his computer and began searching through files. After several minutes, he found what he was looking for, a spreadsheet of Victoria's charitable donations from the year before her death. Here, Whitmore Foundation for Pediatric Vision Research. $50,000, given 6 months before Emma was born. Claire stared at the screen. And who recommended Whitmore to Victoria in the first place? Richard scrolled through old emails, searching for anything related to Whitmore. Finally, he found a message from Victoria to a friend, dated 8 months before Emma's birth. Dr. Whitmore came highly recommended by Martin Ashford. Apparently, his daughter was treated by Whitmore years ago with wonderful results. I'm so relieved to have found someone trustworthy. Who is Martin Ashford? Richard's face went pale. He was on the board of Victoria's main charity. He died about 3 years ago, heart attack. And his daughter? I never met her. But if she was treated by Whitmore... Richard's voice trailed off. The implications were becoming clearer by the minute. Claire stood and began pacing. We need to find Martin Ashford's daughter. If she was one of Whitmore's patients, she might be able to tell us what really happened. She might be another victim. Richard was already reaching for his phone. Thomas, I need you to find someone. Her name is... He stopped, realizing he didn't know. Her last name is Ashford. Her father was Martin Ashford. She would be in her 30s now, maybe early 40s. She was allegedly treated by Marcus Whitmore as a child. He listened, then nodded. Call me the moment you have anything. While they waited, Claire went to check on Emma. The little girl was sitting with Margaret in the sunroom, touching the petals of a flower arrangement with wonder in her eyes. There's so many colors, Emma said softly. I never knew there were so many colors. Claire knelt beside her. Which one is your favorite? Emma pointed to a yellow rose. That one. It looks like sunshine. Yellow is a beautiful color. Emma turned to look at Claire, her unfocused gaze slightly clearer than it had been the day before. Claire, why couldn't I see before? The question hit Claire like a punch to the chest. How do you explain to a child that someone deliberately stole her sight? How do you tell her that the darkness she lived in wasn't fate but cruelty? You were sick, sweetheart, but you're getting better now. Will I be able to see everything eventually, like normal people? We don't know yet, but you're seeing more every day, and that's what matters. Emma nodded, then went back to touching the flowers. But there was something new in her face, a quiet determination that hadn't been there before. I want to see the ocean, she said. I heard it sounds beautiful, but I bet it looks even better. Maybe we can go see it soon. A promise. Claire smiled through the tightness in her throat. Promise. That evening, Thomas called with news. He had found Martin Ashford's daughter. Her name was Rebecca Ashford Wu, and she lived in Boston. She was 41 years old, married with 2 children, and worked as a nonprofit administrator. Did you contact her? Richard asked. Not yet. I wanted to clear it with you first. This is delicate territory. If she's connected to Whitmore, she might not want to talk, or she might be loyal to him for some reason. I'll call her myself. Richard, that might not be wise. She might have answers. I need those answers. Richard dialed the number Thomas had provided. It rang 4 times before a woman answered. Hello, Mrs. Ashford Wu. My name is Richard Hartwell. I'm calling about a matter that involves both our families. It's about Dr. Marcus Whitmore. There was a long silence on the other end. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, How did you find me? My legal team tracked you down. Mrs. Ashford Wu, I believe my daughter may have been one of Dr. Whitmore's victims. I'm trying to understand what he did and why. Your father recommended him to my wife before she died. Another silence. When Rebecca spoke again, her voice was trembling. I can't talk about this over the phone. If anyone finds out I spoke to you, finds out, who would care? You don't understand. The settlement, I signed papers. We all signed papers. If I violate the agreement, your father is dead. The doctor lost his license. What are you afraid of? Rebecca made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. You really don't know, do you? Whitmore wasn't working alone. He had backing, serious backing. The pharmaceutical companies, the research institutions, they're still operating, and they're still paying attention. Richard felt a chill run through him. Are you saying someone is watching you? I'm saying that when I tried to talk about this 5 years ago, my husband lost his job. My children's school records were suddenly misplaced. Our house was broken into twice and nothing was stolen. She stopped, struggling to control her breathing. Just warnings, messages, reminders that I signed an agreement and should keep my mouth shut. Richard looked at Claire, who had been listening with growing horror. Mrs. Ashford, woo Rebecca, I have resources. I can protect you. I can protect your family, but I need to know what happened. My daughter is 5 years old. She spent her entire life in darkness because of this man. I need to understand why. The line went quiet for so long that Richard thought she had hung up. Then, not over the phone, if you want to know the truth, come to Boston. Come alone. And don't tell anyone where you're going. When? Tomorrow. I'll text you an address. And Mr. Hartwell, be careful. You're opening a door that powerful people have spent a lot of money to keep closed. The call ended. Richard set down his phone and turned to Claire. This is bigger than one doctor. Claire nodded slowly. I think we're just seeing the surface. There's something underneath that we haven't found yet. I'm going to Boston tomorrow. I need to hear what she has to say. You're not going alone, she said to come alone. And I'm saying you're not going without backup. If what she's saying is true, if there are powerful people trying to keep this quiet, you could be walking into a trap. Richard considered this. Claire was right. He had spent 5 years trusting the wrong people. He wasn't going to make that mistake again. Fine, you'll come with me. But stay in the car when I meet with her. If anything seems wrong, call Thomas immediately. Agreed. That night, neither of them slept much. Richard sat in Emma's room watching her sleep. She looked peaceful, more peaceful than he had ever seen her. Her eyes moved beneath her lids, and he wondered if she was dreaming in colors for the first time, if her mind was finally showing her all the things it had been denied. I'm going to fix this, he whispered to her. Whatever it takes, I'm going to find out the truth, and I'm going to make sure no one ever hurts you again. Emma stirred slightly, then settled back into sleep. One small hand reached out and found Richard's, holding on even in her dreams. Claire stood in the doorway, watching. She thought about her own daughter, the baby she had held for 11 days before she was gone. The weight of that loss would never fully leave her. But now, watching this father hold his daughter's hand, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Purpose. She had come to this house looking for escape. Instead, she had found a fight worth fighting. Tomorrow, they would go to Boston. Tomorrow, they would start uncovering the truth about Marcus Whitmore and whatever dark network supported him. But tonight, for just a few hours, they would rest. They would gather their strength, because Claire had a feeling that what lay ahead would require every ounce of courage they had. The flight to Boston left at 7 in the morning. Richard told Margaret they were attending a business meeting and would return by evening. He didn't want to explain more than necessary, not until they knew what they were dealing with. The address Rebecca had texted led them to a small coffee shop in Cambridge, tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner. Richard went inside while Claire waited in the rental car across the street, her phone ready to call for help if needed. Rebecca was already there, sitting at a corner table with her back to the wall. She was a thin woman with nervous eyes and graying hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. When Richard approached, she didn't stand or offer her hand. Sit down. Don't order anything. Richard sat. Thank you for meeting me. Don't thank me yet. You might wish you'd never found me. She glanced toward the door, checking for anyone who might have followed. Tell me about your daughter. What exactly happened? Richard explained everything: the diagnosis at birth, the eye drops, Claire's discovery, Emma's improvement once the medication was stopped. Rebecca listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each detail. It's the same, she finally said. It's exactly the same. What happened to you? Rebecca's hands were shaking as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. I was diagnosed blind at 3 months old. Whitmore treated me for the first 8 years of my life. My parents were told there was no hope. My optic nerves were damaged. My retinas were non-functional. They gave up on ever seeing me improve. But But when I was 8, my family moved to California. My new pediatrician thought something was off about my previous treatment. She ran her own tests and discovered that my eyes were structurally normal. She recommended stopping all medication immediately. Rebecca's voice broke. Within 6 weeks, I could see. Richard felt sick. You were never blind. No, or if I was, it was caused by the treatment, not prevented by it. She wiped her eyes angrily. My parents sued Whitmore. They thought they would expose him, protect other children. Instead, they were destroyed. The legal team representing Whitmore and his backers was relentless. They dug up every mistake my parents had ever made. They threatened to take our house, ruin my father's career. In the end, my parents settled for a fraction of what they were owed, signed an NDA, and never spoke of it again. And your father still recommended Whitmore to my wife. Rebecca looked at him with something like pity. He didn't. He would never have recommended that monster to anyone. But the email my wife wrote that your father recommended him. Rebecca shook her head slowly. Mr. Hartwell, my father hated Marcus Whitmore. He spent years trying to warn people about him quietly without violating the legal agreement. Someone used his name, someone who knew enough about my family's history to make the recommendation seem credible. Richard's blood ran cold. Who? That's what I've spent years trying to figure out, and that's why I'm scared to talk to you. Rebecca leaned closer, lowering her voice. Whitmore isn't the mastermind. He's a tool, a very skilled, very morally bankrupt tool. But behind him, there's a network pharmaceutical companies, research foundations, wealthy investors. They fund experimental treatments on children using doctors like Whitmore to conduct trials that would never be approved through legitimate channels. But why target children? Why blindness specifically? Because blind children are invisible. They don't go to regular schools. They don't interact with the broader community. Their medical care is handled by specialists, not general practitioners. And their parents are desperate enough to trust anyone who offers hope. Rebecca's face twisted with bitterness. I was a test subject for 8 years. When I started seeing it wasn't because the treatment failed, it was because the trial was over. They had all the data they needed. Richard sat back, his mind reeling. You're saying this is systematic, organized. I'm saying your daughter wasn't an accident. She was selected. Somehow, someone decided she would be useful for whatever they were testing next. My wife. I don't know how your wife was connected, but the fact that she died so soon after your daughter was born. Rebecca met his eyes steadily. I would look very carefully at that helicopter crash, Mr. Hartwell. Very carefully indeed. Richard couldn't speak. The possibility that Victoria's death wasn't an accident, that it was somehow connected to whatever had been done to Emma, was too horrifying to process. I have to go, Rebecca said, standing abruptly. I've already said too much, but here. She slid a small envelope across the table. This is everything I've been able to gather over the years. Documents, names, connections. I don't know what good it will do, but maybe you'll be able to make sense of it. Rebecca, wait. If what you're saying is true, you need protection. Your family needs protection. She laughed bitterly. I've needed protection for 30 years. It's too late for me. But your daughter... Her voice softened. Your daughter is young. She's just beginning to see. Don't let them take that from her again. She walked out of the coffee shop without looking back. Richard sat alone at the table, holding the envelope, feeling like the ground had opened beneath his feet. Everything he thought he knew about his life, his wife's death, his daughter's condition, his own blindness to the truth was collapsing around him. He walked back to the car in a daze. Claire took one look at his face and knew something had fundamentally shifted. What did she tell you? Richard handed her the envelope. Everything is connected. Victoria's death, Emma's treatment, all of it. Claire opened the envelope and began reading. Her face went pale. Richard, some of these documents, they're internal memos from pharmaceutical companies. How did she get these? I don't know. But if they're real, we're not just fighting one corrupt doctor, we're fighting an entire system. Richard started the car. Then we'd better start gathering our own evidence, because I'm not stopping until I expose every single person who had a hand in hurting my daughter. As they drove back toward the airport, neither of them noticed the black sedan that pulled out behind them and followed at a careful distance. The war had officially begun. The black sedan followed them all the way to the airport. Claire noticed it first. She had been checking the side mirror obsessively since they left Cambridge, and the same car had been 3 vehicles behind them for the past 20 minutes. "Richard," she said quietly, "don't look now, but I think we're being followed." Richard's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Are you sure?" "Black sedan, tinted windows. It's been with us since the coffee shop." Richard took the next exit without signaling, cutting across 2 lanes of traffic. The sedan followed. "That's not a coincidence," Claire said. Richard pulled into a gas station and parked near the entrance where there were plenty of people and security cameras. The sedan drove past slowly, then continued down the road and disappeared around a corner. "They wanted us to know," Richard said grimly. "They wanted us to know we're being watched." Claire's heart was pounding. "Rebecca was right. These people are serious." "Then we need to be serious too." Richard pulled out his phone and called Thomas. "Change of plans. I need security at the house, armed guards around the clock starting tonight. And I want you to hire a private investigator, someone who specializes in corporate espionage and surveillance, someone who can find out who's watching us." Thomas's voice was cautious. "Richard, what happened in Boston?" "Everything changed. I'll explain when I'm back. Just get those guards in place. My daughter is not safe." They made it back to New York by evening. True to his word, Thomas had arranged for a security team to arrive at the mansion within hours. 2 guards were stationed at the main gate, 2 more at the house itself. The staff was confused and frightened by the sudden change, but Richard didn't explain. Emma was asleep when they arrived. Claire went to check on her immediately, her heart not settling until she saw the little girl breathing peacefully in her bed. "She had a good day," Margaret reported. "She asked about colors again. She wanted to know what everything was called. She must have asked me 100 questions." Claire smiled despite her exhaustion. "That's wonderful. Is everything all right? Dear Mr. Hartwell seems very tense." "Everything is fine. We're just being careful." But everything was not fine, and being careful might not be enough. Over the next few days, Richard and Claire began working through the documents Rebecca had given them. There were dozens of pages, internal memos, financial records, clinical trial protocols. Some were heavily redacted. Others were handwritten notes in what appeared to be Rebecca's own handwriting, piecing together connections she had observed over the years. The picture that emerged was terrifying. Marcus Whitmore had been part of a network of physicians who conducted unauthorized clinical trials on children. The trials were funded by 3 pharmaceutical companies, all subsidiaries of a larger conglomerate called Meridian Health Partners. The children selected for these trials were typically from wealthy families, families who could afford expensive specialists, and who wouldn't question experimental treatments presented as cutting-edge care. "Why wealthy families?" Claire asked, studying a chart that mapped connections between doctors, patients, and payments. Richard had been asking himself the same question. Because wealthy families don't go to social services, they don't end up in public hospitals where someone might notice something wrong. They have private doctors, private schools, private everything, and if something goes wrong, they can be bought off quietly. Like Rebecca's family. Exactly like Rebecca's family. The documents also revealed something else, a pattern of deaths among the parents of children enrolled in these trials. Not all of them, but enough to be suspicious. A car accident here, a sudden illness there, a boating mishap, a house fire, and a helicopter crash. Richard stared at that list for a long time. Victoria's death was not mentioned specifically, but the pattern was unmistakable. Parents who asked too many questions, who threatened to go public, who showed signs of discovering the truth, they had a way of dying. "I need to know more about Victoria's crash," Richard said. "I need to see the investigation reports." Thomas arranged for the files to be delivered the next day. Richard read through them with Claire at his side, both of them looking for anything that might suggest foul play. The official report concluded that the crash was caused by pilot error combined with severe weather conditions. The pilot, a man named James Morrison, had attempted to fly through a storm front instead of diverting to an alternate airport. The helicopter lost control and crashed into a mountainside. Victoria was killed instantly. Morrison survived with serious injuries. "Where is Morrison now?" Richard asked. Thomas checked his notes. "He lives in Florida. He never flew commercially again after the crash. Received a substantial settlement from the helicopter company." A settlement for an accident that was supposedly his fault. The lawyers argued that the aircraft's weather radar was malfunctioning. The company settled to avoid a prolonged lawsuit. Richard's jaw tightened. "I want to talk to him." "Richard, it's been 5 years. I don't care if it's been 50 years. That man was the last person to see my wife alive. I want to know what really happened in that helicopter." 2 days later, Richard flew to Florida alone. Claire stayed behind to watch over Emma and continue reviewing the documents. The security team was on high alert. No one entered or left the property without being logged and checked. James Morrison lived in a modest house in a suburb of Tampa. He was 53 years old, walked with a limp from injuries sustained in the crash, and looked like a man who hadn't slept well in years. When Richard knocked on his door, Morrison's face went pale. "Mr. Hartwell, you know who I am. I know who you are." Morrison stepped back, his hands trembling. "I've been expecting someone to come for 5 years. I didn't think it would be you." Richard stepped inside without being invited. "Tell me what really happened." Morrison sank into a chair, his face buried in his hands. "I can't. If I talk, they'll kill me. They've made that very clear." "Who is they?" "I don't know names. I just know they have money and power, and they don't care who they hurt." Morrison looked up, his eyes red and haunted. "They paid me, Mr. Hartwell. They paid me to fly into that storm." Richard felt the blood drain from his face. "You crashed that helicopter on purpose." No, I didn't crash it on purpose. But I was told to fly that route at that time, no matter what the weather showed. I was told it was important that Mrs. Hartwell had to arrive at the charity event on schedule. They said the weather reports were exaggerated, that I would be fine." "And you believed them?" Morrison's voice cracked. "They paid me $50,000. My wife was sick. We had medical bills we couldn't pay. I thought I could handle it. I've flown in bad weather before. But this was different. The storm came out of nowhere. The instruments went crazy. I tried to pull up, tried to get above it, but the controls weren't responding the way they should have." Richard's hands were shaking with rage. "My wife died because you took a bribe." I know. Morrison was crying now. "I've lived with that every single day. When I survived and she didn't, I wanted to die. I tried to come forward to tell someone what happened, but they got to me first. A man came to my hospital room while I was still in a neck brace. He showed me pictures of my wife, my kids, my parents. He said if I ever talked, they would all have accidents too. So you stayed quiet." "I stayed quiet. I took their money and I stayed quiet, and I've hated myself every day since." Morrison looked at Richard with desperate eyes. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything, but I am." Richard stood in the middle of that shabby living room, feeling like the world had tilted on its axis. His wife hadn't died in an accident. She had been murdered. Murdered because she knew something or was about to discover something, or simply because she was in the way. "The man who threatened you," Richard said, his voice barely controlled. "What did he look like?" "Tall, gray hair, expensive suit. He spoke very quietly, very calmly, like he was discussing the weather. He had a scar on his left hand, running from his thumb to his wrist." Richard filed that description away. "And the money who paid you?" "It came through a company called Greenfield Aviation Services. But when I tried to look them up later, they didn't exist. It was a shell company created just for that transaction." Richard pulled out his phone and made a note of the name. Thomas would need to trace it. "If you had information that could help me expose these people," Richard said, "would you be willing to testify?" Morrison's face went gray with fear. "They would kill me." "I can protect you. I have resources." "No one can protect me from these people. You don't understand. They're everywhere. They have connections in law enforcement, in the government, in the media. The settlement I received after the crash, it came with conditions. I'm monitored constantly. They know when I leave my house, when I make phone calls, when I send emails. Then come with me now, right now. I'll put you somewhere safe." Morrison was silent for a long moment. Richard could see the war playing out in his eyes, fear versus guilt, self-preservation versus the desperate need for redemption. "I have records," Morrison finally said. "Documents, recordings, things I kept as insurance in case they ever decided I was a loose end. I never thought I'd use them, but—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "If you can really protect me, I'll give you everything I have." "Where are the records?" "Safe deposit box. Different bank, different name. I can get them tomorrow." Richard shook his head. "We get them now. Tonight. Before anyone knows I've been here." An hour later, they were at a small bank in a neighboring town. Morrison used a key and a fake ID to access a box registered under a false name. Inside were 3 thick envelopes and a flash drive. "Everything's there," Morrison said. "Emails, payment records, photos of the man who threatened me. I kept it all because I knew someday, somehow it would matter." Richard took the envelopes and the drive. "Come with me to New York. I have a secure location where you can stay while we figure out our next move." Morrison hesitated. "My wife—" "Bring her. Bring anyone you need. But we leave tonight." By midnight, Richard was on a private jet back to New York with James Morrison and his wife. Thomas had arranged for a safe house, an apartment in Manhattan that wasn't connected to any of Richard's known properties. Morrison would stay there under guard until they could determine how to proceed. When Richard finally returned to the mansion, it was nearly 3 in the morning. Claire was waiting for him in the study, still awake, surrounded by documents. "Tell me everything," she said. Richard told her. About Morrison's confession, about the bribe, about the threat, about Victoria being murdered because someone wanted to silence her. Claire listened in horrified silence. When he finished, she reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm so sorry, Richard. I'm so sorry." "She knew something," Richard said. "Victoria must have discovered something about Whitmore or the pharmaceutical companies. That's why they killed her. And then they kept me isolated, kept me focused on Emma's condition, kept me so overwhelmed with grief and responsibility that I never thought to question anything. They used your love for Emma against you." "Yes, and they almost got away with it." Claire squeezed his hand. "What do we do now?" "We build a case. Morrison's documents, Rebecca's files, the lab analysis of those eye drops, we put it all together. And then we go to the FBI. Will they believe us? I don't know, but we have to try." The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Thomas worked around the clock, coordinating with forensic accountants and private investigators to trace the money that had funded Whitmore's operations. They discovered that Greenfield Aviation Services, the shell company that had paid Morrison, was connected to Meridian Health Partners through a labyrinth of subsidiaries and offshore accounts. Rebecca's documents filled in more gaps. The clinical trials had been ongoing for at least 15 years, involving dozens of children across multiple states. Some of the children had recovered like Rebecca and now Emma. Others had not been so lucky, and then there were the parents who had died. Richard counted 7 deaths that matched the pattern wealthy parents' children enrolled in suspicious treatment programs, sudden fatal accidents that were never adequately investigated. Victoria was among them. "This is enough," Thomas said finally, after reviewing everything they had gathered. "This is enough to take to federal prosecutors. But Richard, I have to warn you, once we do this, there's no going back. These people will fight us with everything they have." "Let them fight," Richard said. "I'm ready." The meeting with the FBI was arranged for the following Monday. Richard would present the evidence himself, with Thomas providing legal support. They had prepared meticulously, organizing everything into a clear narrative that even the most skeptical investigator couldn't ignore. But on the Sunday night before the meeting, everything went wrong. Claire was putting Emma to bed when she heard the commotion downstairs, voices shouting, running footsteps, then gunshots. She grabbed Emma and pulled her into the closet, pressing a hand over the little girl's mouth. "Stay quiet, sweetheart. Stay very quiet." Emma's eyes were wide with terror, but she didn't make a sound. Claire could hear men's voices, rough, unfamiliar, and then Richard shouting something she couldn't make out. More gunshots, glass breaking, then silence. Claire waited, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Minutes passed. Hours seemed to pass. Finally, she heard footsteps approaching the bedroom. "Claire, Claire, it's okay. They're gone." It was Richard's voice, but it sounded strange, strained. Claire slowly opened the closet door. Richard stood in the doorway, his face pale, his shirt stained with blood. "Are you hurt?" she gasped. "It's not my blood. One of the guards, he was hit. He's alive, but—" Richard's voice broke. "They tried to take Emma. They came for her specifically." Claire looked down at the little girl in her arms. Emma was shaking, her face buried against Claire's shoulder. "They didn't get her," Claire said fiercely. "They didn't get her." "No, because of the guards, because we were prepared." Richard knelt beside them and wrapped his arms around both of them. "But they'll try again. They know we're close to exposing them, and they're desperate." "What do we do?" Richard's face hardened with determination. "We don't wait until Monday. We go to the FBI tonight, right now." Within an hour they were on the road, Richard, Claire, Emma, and 2 armed guards heading toward the FBI field office in Manhattan. Thomas met them there with all the evidence, and by 4 a.m, Richard was sitting across from 2 federal agents laying out everything they had discovered. The agents listened without interrupting. When Richard finished, they exchanged a look that told him they had heard about Meridian Health Partners before. "We've been investigating that company for 2 years, one of the agents said. "But we've never been able to get anyone to talk. Witnesses disappear. Evidence gets destroyed. Whoever is behind this has very long arms." "I have witnesses who will talk," Richard said. "James Morrison will testify about the helicopter crash. Rebecca Ashford Wu has documents going back decades. And my daughter," his voice caught, "my daughter is living proof of what they did to children." The agent nodded slowly. "We're going to need protective custody for all of them, and for you. Whatever it takes, just bring these people down." The FBI moved fast. Within 48 hours, they had executed search warrants on 3 pharmaceutical companies, seized documents from Meridian Health Partners headquarters, and arrested 7 people, including 2 doctors who had worked alongside Marcus Whitmore. But Whitmore himself was still missing. "We traced him to Scottsdale, then lost him," the lead agent told Richard. "He's using fake identities, moving constantly, but we'll find him." "What about the man who threatened Morrison, the one with the scar on his hand?" The agent hesitated. "We have a lead on him. His name is Victor Crane, former military intelligence, now works as a consultant for various private corporations. He's dangerous, and he's connected to some very powerful people." "Is he the one who sent those men to my house?" "We believe so." Richard felt cold rage building in his chest. "Find him. Find him and Whitmore and everyone else involved. I want them all to pay for what they did." The agent met his eyes. "We will, Mr. Hartwell. I promise you we will." 3 days later, they found Marcus Whitmore in a motel in rural Arizona. He was arrested without incident, a frail, elderly man who seemed almost relieved when the agents put handcuffs on his wrists. "I was tired of running," he said during his first interrogation. "I knew this day would come eventually." "Why did you do it?" the agent asked. "Why did you blind those children?" Whitmore's answer chilled everyone who heard it. "Because I was told to, because they paid me more money than I could ever make practicing legitimate medicine, and because—" He paused, his expression distant. "Because I was curious. I wanted to see what would happen." "You wanted to see what would happen to children you deliberately blinded." "It was science, clinical observation. The pharmaceutical companies wanted data on how children adapt to sensory deprivation, how their brains compensate, how certain compounds affect neurological development. I provided that data." "And the children? Did you ever think about what you were doing to them?" Whitmore shrugged. "They were subjects, that's all." When Richard heard about this interrogation, he had to leave the room. Claire found him in the hallway, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. He doesn't even see them as human, Richard said, his voice shaking. My daughter, all those children, they were just experiments to him. Claire put her hand on his arm. He's going to prison, Richard, for a very long time. He can't hurt anyone else. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But as the days passed and more arrests were made, Richard began to feel something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The investigation was expanding rapidly. Federal prosecutors were building cases against executives at Meridian Health Partners. James Morrison was cooperating fully, his testimony crucial to establishing the connection between the pharmaceutical companies and Victoria's murder. And Emma. Emma was thriving. Her vision continued to improve with proper therapy and care. She could now see colors, clearly recognize faces, read large print with assistance. Every day brought new discoveries for her: the blue of the sky, the green of grass, the way light changed throughout the day. "Daddy," she said one afternoon, "I can see the birds now. I never knew birds were so beautiful." Richard picked her up and held her tight, tears streaming down his face. "Neither did I, sweetheart. Neither did I." Claire watched them together and felt her heart swell with an emotion she couldn't quite name. She had come to this house broken, running from her own grief. She had found a purpose then, a cause, then something even more precious: a family. She wasn't Emma's mother, she knew that. Victoria had been Emma's mother, and nothing would ever change that. But she had become something important to this little girl, and Emma had become something important to her. "Claire?" Emma's voice broke into her thoughts. "Will you stay with us forever?" Claire looked at Richard, who was watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "If you'll have me," Claire said softly, "I'll stay as long as you want." Emma grinned and threw her arms around Claire's neck. "Forever, then. You have to stay forever." Richard smiled, the first real smile Claire had seen from him, and in that moment, surrounded by the ruins of the old world and the foundations of something new, all three of them understood that whatever came next, they would face it together. The storm had passed, but the healing was just beginning. Victor Crane was still out there. That fact haunted Richard every night long after Emma had gone to sleep and the mansion had fallen silent. The FBI had arrested Whitmore, had taken down executives at Meridian Health Partners, had built cases against doctors and administrators and accountants. But the man who had orchestrated Victoria's murder, who had sent armed men to kidnap Emma, who had threatened James Morrison's family, that man remained free. "We're closing in," the lead agent told Richard during their weekly update call. "Crane has connections, but they're drying up. His employers are either in custody or running scared. He's got nowhere left to hide." "That's what you said 2 weeks ago." "These things take time, Mr. Hartwell. We have to do this by the book." Richard hung up, feeling more frustrated than reassured. By the book meant slowly. By the book meant carefully. By the book meant Victor Crane had time to disappear completely, to reinvent himself somewhere else, to escape justice, like so many others before him. Claire found him in his study that evening, staring at the wall where he had pinned photographs and documents connecting everyone involved in the conspiracy. Whitmore's face was there, crossed out with red marker. Several pharmaceutical executives also crossed out. But Victor Crane's photo remained unmarked, a grainy surveillance image showing a tall man with gray hair and cold eyes. "You need to sleep," Claire said softly. "I need to find him." The FBI is looking. The FBI is constrained by procedures and protocols. Crane isn't. Richard turned to face her. Every day he's free is another day he could hurt someone else, another family, another child. Claire sat down across from him. "What are you thinking about doing?" Richard was quiet for a long moment. "Thomas has contacts, private investigators who don't follow the same rules as federal agents. If I put enough resources into it, Richard, that could be dangerous. If Crane finds out you're hunting him specifically, he might come after you again, after Emma. He's going to come after us anyway. We exposed his entire operation. We destroyed everything he built. Men like Crane don't forgive that. They don't forget." Richard's voice hardened. "The only way my daughter is ever truly safe is if he's behind bars. Or dead." Claire reached across the desk and took his hand. "I understand. I do. But promise me you won't do anything reckless. Promise me you'll let the professionals handle the dangerous parts. I promise I'll be careful. That's not what I asked. And Richard met her eyes. He couldn't lie to her, not after everything they'd been through together. I promise I'll do whatever it takes to protect our family. Whatever it takes. Claire held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. She understood what he meant, even if she wished it were different. The next morning, Richard met with a man named Daniel Reeves. Reeves was former CIA, now running a private security and investigation firm that catered to wealthy clients with sensitive problems. Thomas had worked with him before and vouched for his discretion. "Victor Crane," Reeves said, studying the file Richard had assembled. "I know him. Worked in the same circles years ago before I went private. He's dangerous, but he's not invincible." "Can you find him?" "Given enough time and resources, I can find anyone. But Crane has been doing this for a long time. He knows how to disappear." "Name your price." Reeves looked up from the file. "It's not about money, Mr. Hartwell. It's about understanding what you're asking for. If I find Crane, what do you want me to do? Provide his location to the FBI or handle it differently?" Richard felt the weight of that question. He knew what Reeves was really asking, and for a moment, just a moment, he was tempted. How easy it would be to simply eliminate the threat, to ensure that Crane could never hurt anyone again. But then he thought about Emma, about the kind of man he wanted to be for her, about the example he wanted to set. "Find him," Richard said, "and contact the FBI immediately. I want him arrested, tried, and convicted. I want him to spend the rest of his life in a cell knowing that we beat him. That's more important to me than his death." Reeves nodded slowly. "That's the right answer, and it tells me you're the kind of client I want to work for." They shook hands, and Reeves got to work. While the hunt for Crane continued, life at the mansion settled into a new rhythm. Emma had started working with a vision therapist 3 times a week, and her progress was remarkable. She could now read simple books independently, recognize faces across a room, and navigate the house without assistance. "Watch me, Claire," she called one afternoon, running across the lawn toward a soccer ball Richard had set up for her. She kicked it awkwardly, missing the goal by several feet, but she kicked it deliberately, accurately, seeing exactly where it was and where she wanted it to go. Claire clapped and cheered. "That was amazing." "I'm going to be a soccer player," Emma declared, "or maybe an artist, or maybe both." "You can be anything you want, sweetheart." Richard watched from the patio, his heart full in a way he hadn't thought possible 6 months ago. His daughter was running, playing, laughing, seeing. Every day felt like a miracle. But the shadow of Crane still loomed. 3 weeks after hiring Reeves, Richard received a call at 2 in the morning. He grabbed the phone, his heart already racing. "We found him," Reeves said. "He's in Montreal using a Canadian passport under a false name. He's been there for about a week, apparently arranging transportation to somewhere overseas. My guess is South America." "Have you contacted the FBI?" "I'm about to, but I wanted to give you a heads up first. They'll need to coordinate with Canadian authorities, which means paperwork and delays. There's a chance Crane could slip away before they get their act together." Richard sat up in bed, his mind racing. "What are our options?" "I have people in Montreal. Good people. If you authorize it, we could maintain surveillance on Crane until the FBI is ready to move. Make sure he doesn't disappear again." "Do it. Whatever it costs, do it." "Consider it done." Richard hung up and immediately called the lead FBI agent, waking him from sleep to share the information. The agent was grateful for the tip, but cautious about promising a timeline. "International coordination is complicated," he explained. "We'll move as fast as we can, but I can't guarantee when we'll be ready to act. Every hour matters. Crane is planning to leave the country." "I understand. We'll do our best." Richard spent the next 2 days in a state of constant tension. He couldn't focus on anything except his phone, waiting for updates from Reeves or the FBI. Claire tried to keep things normal for Emma's sake, but even she could feel the anxiety radiating from Richard. Finally, on the 3rd day, the call came. "We got him," the FBI agent said. "Canadian authorities arrested him this morning at the Montreal airport. He was carrying 3 different passports and enough cash to live for years. He's being extradited to the United States as we speak." Richard closed his eyes and let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for months. "Thank you. Thank you. You did the hard part, Mr. Hartwell. You never gave up. You kept pushing when anyone else would have walked away. I had something worth fighting for." "Yes, you did." When Richard told Claire the news, she burst into tears. They held each other in the middle of the study, both shaking with relief. "It's over," Claire whispered. "It's finally over." "Not yet," Richard said. "Not until he's convicted. But we're close. We're so close." Victor Crane's arrest made national news. The story that had been building for months, the pharmaceutical conspiracy, the blinded children, the murdered parents, exploded into public consciousness. News crews camped outside the Hartwell estate. Journalists flooded Richard's office with interview requests. Thomas advised him to stay silent, to let the legal process unfold without commentary. But Richard disagreed. "People need to hear this story," he said. "Not for me, for all the other families who were hurt, for the children who are still suffering. If speaking out helps prevent this from ever happening again, then I have to do it." He chose one journalist, a respected investigative reporter from a major network who had a reputation for fairness and thoroughness. The interview was scheduled for the following week, giving Richard time to prepare and consult with lawyers about what he could and couldn't say. But before the interview could happen, something unexpected occurred. A letter arrived at the mansion. It was addressed to Richard personally, with no return address and a postmark from New York City. Inside was a single sheet of paper with typed words. "Your wife didn't die because she discovered our operation. She died because she was part of it. Ask yourself why she donated to Whitmore's foundation. Ask yourself how she really found him. The truth is more complicated than you think. A friend." Richard read the letter 3 times, his hands trembling. Then he showed it to Claire. "It's a lie," Claire said immediately. "Someone is trying to mess with your head." "But what if it's not? What if Victoria knew something? What if she was involved somehow?" "Richard, this is exactly what these people do. They manipulate. They create doubt. They try to destroy you from the inside." I know that's probably what this is, but I have to be sure." Richard's voice cracked. "I loved her, Claire. I built a shrine to her memory. If she was involved in hurting our daughter, she wasn't. You know she wasn't." "I don't know anything anymore. Everything I thought I knew has turned out to be wrong." Claire took the letter from his hands and set it aside. "Then let's find out the truth. Together. We'll investigate Victoria's connection to Whitmore, really investigate it, and we'll prove that this letter is nothing but poison from a desperate enemy." Richard nodded slowly. "You're right. I need to know. One way or the other, I need to know." Thomas helped them dig into Victoria's financial records and communications from the years before her death. They spent days going through emails, bank statements, charity records, anything that might explain her connection to Marcus Whitmore. What they found was both relieving and heartbreaking. Victoria had indeed donated to Whitmore's Research Foundation, but the donation was part of a larger pattern of charitable giving to children's health causes. She had given to dozens of organizations during that period, and there was no evidence she had any personal relationship with Whitmore or knowledge of his illegal activities. The recommendation from Martin Ashford, they now understood, had been forged. Someone had used Ashford's name without his knowledge, knowing that Victoria would trust a referral from a fellow charity board member. "She was targeted," Richard said, piecing it together. "They knew she was pregnant. They knew our baby would be born into wealth and privacy. So they arranged for Victoria to find Whitmore, to trust him, to bring him into our lives. And when she started asking questions, they killed her." Richard's voice was hollow. "She wasn't part of it. She was a victim. Just like Emma." Claire held him as he finally allowed himself to grieve, not just for Victoria's death, but for the betrayal of her memory that the letter had attempted. Someone had tried to make him doubt his wife, to poison the love he still carried for her, and they had failed. She was a good person. Richard said through his tears. She loved Emma more than anything. She would never have hurt her. I know. She chose you. She chose Emma. And she died protecting your family, even if she didn't know that's what she was doing. The anonymous letter, they concluded, had been sent by someone connected to Crane or Meridian, a final desperate attempt to destabilize Richard before the trial began. It had almost worked. But the truth was stronger than lies. Victor Crane's trial began 3 months later. The prosecution had assembled an overwhelming case witness testimony, financial records, electronic communications, and Morrison's devastating account of the helicopter crash. Richard attended every day, sitting in the gallery with Claire beside him, watching justice slowly unfold. Crane's defense tried every tactic attacking witness: credibility, challenging evidence, authenticity, arguing jurisdictional issues. But piece by piece, the prosecution dismantled their arguments. The turning point came when Rebecca Ashford Wu took the stand. She spoke calmly and clearly about her childhood treatment, the settlement her family had been forced to accept, and the decades of silence that had followed. When the prosecutor asked her why she had finally decided to come forward, she looked directly at the jury. "Because a little girl named Emma deserved the truth," she said, "and because every child who was hurt by these people deserves to have their story told." Several jurors wiped tears from their eyes. Crane himself never testified. His attorneys kept him off the stand, knowing that his cold demeanor would only alienate the jury further. He sat through the trial with an expression of detached contempt, as if none of it mattered to him. But when the verdict came back guilty on all counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, something flickered in his eyes. Fear, perhaps, or the realization that his carefully constructed empire had finally crumbled completely. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Richard watched as the guards led Crane out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Their eyes met briefly, and Richard felt something he hadn't expected: pity, not for the crimes Crane had committed, but for the emptiness of a life devoted entirely to power and profit. Crane had never known love, never known family, never known the kind of purpose that made existence meaningful. He would spend his remaining years in a cell alone, with nothing but memories of the empire he had lost. Richard walked out of the courthouse into the sunlight where Claire and Emma were waiting for him. Emma ran forward and threw her arms around him. "Did the bad man get in trouble?" "Yes, sweetheart. He got in a lot of trouble. He can't hurt anyone ever again." Emma nodded solemnly. "Good. He was mean." "Yes, he was." Claire joined them, linking her arm through Richard's. "How do you feel?" Richard considered the question carefully. He had expected to feel triumph, or at least satisfaction. Instead, he felt something quieter, calmer. "I feel like we can finally start living," he said. "Really living." In the weeks that followed the trial, the Hartwell family began building their new life. Richard gradually returned to his business, though he delegated more responsibilities than before. He no longer needed to fill every hour with work to distract himself from grief. He had something better now, something worth coming home to. Claire officially became Emma's legal guardian, a process Richard had initiated months earlier with her blessing. It wasn't adoption. They both agreed that Victoria's role as Emma's mother should never be erased, but it gave Claire parental rights and responsibilities. "You know what this means," Richard told her the day the paperwork was finalized. "You're stuck with us now." Claire smiled. "I think I can live with that." Emma, overhearing, jumped up and down with excitement. "Does this mean Claire is my mom now?" Richard and Claire exchanged glances. This was a conversation they had discussed carefully, wanting to honor both Victoria's memory and Claire's role in Emma's life. "Claire is your Claire," Richard explained gently. "She loves you and takes care of you and will always be here for you. And you also have a mom, your mother Victoria, who loved you more than anything before she went to heaven." Emma thought about this. "So, I have a mom in heaven and a Claire on earth." "Exactly." "That sounds like a lot of love." Claire knelt down and hugged her. "It is, sweetheart. It's so much love." Richard watched them embrace, and for the first time in 5 years, he felt the weight of grief lift from his shoulders. Victoria was gone, and nothing would bring her back. But she had left behind a daughter who was now thriving, seeing the world with fresh eyes, surrounded by people who loved her. Victoria would have wanted this. Richard was certain of it. That night, after Emma was asleep, Richard and Claire sat together on the patio, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," Richard said quietly. "After Victoria died, I was certain that part of my life was over, that I would just exist until I didn't anymore. And now," Richard turned to look at her. Claire's face was illuminated by the soft glow from the house, and he was struck, not for the first time, by how beautiful she was. Not just physically, but in the way she carried herself, the strength and kindness that radiated from her. "Now I feel like I'm just beginning," he said. Claire smiled a real smile that lit up her entire face. "Me too." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, both understanding that something had shifted between them. The relationship that had started as employer and employee, then evolved into partnership and friendship, was becoming something more. Neither of them rushed it. After everything they had been through, they knew the value of patience, of letting things unfold naturally. But as they walked back inside together, Richard reached out and took Claire's hand. She didn't pull away. The press attention eventually faded, as it always does. News stories captured public interest, and the Hartwell case became just one more chapter in the endless cycle of news. But the impact of their fight continued to ripple outward. Federal regulators implemented new oversight measures for pharmaceutical clinical trials, specifically targeting the practices that had allowed Whitmore's network to operate for so long. Medical licensing boards began sharing information more effectively across state lines. Support groups formed for families affected by similar schemes. Rebecca Ashford Wu became an advocate for medical transparency, speaking at conferences and consulting with legislators on reform measures. She and Richard remained in touch, connected by the trauma they had survived and the healing they were still pursuing. James Morrison, granted immunity for his testimony, returned to a quiet life in Florida. He wrote Richard a letter thanking him for the chance at redemption, for believing that even someone who had made terrible mistakes could still do the right thing. And Emma flourished. Her vision continued to improve, eventually stabilizing at a level that allowed her to function almost normally. She still needed glasses for reading and some activities, but she could see. She could run and play and draw and explore the world that had been hidden from her for so long. On her 6th birthday, Richard threw her a party in the garden. Children from the neighborhood attended kids she had met through her new school, a regular elementary school where she was learning alongside sighted peers. She laughed and played and opened presents with eager hands. At one point, she stopped and looked up at the sky, squinting against the bright blue. "Daddy," she said, "I can see a bird way up there. It's flying so high." Yeah, Richard followed her gaze and saw it, a small, dark shape circling against the clouds. "What kind of bird do you think it is?" "I don't know, but it's beautiful." Claire came to stand beside them, slipping her hand into Richard's. "Everything looks beautiful when you're seeing it for the first time." Emma nodded seriously. "That's true. Every day something looks beautiful for the first time. I never get tired of it." Richard pulled both of them close, his daughter and the woman who had saved her. The three of them stood together, watching the bird soar higher and higher until it disappeared into the endless blue. They had fought through darkness and emerged into light. And though challenges would come again, they always did, Richard knew they would face them together, as a family. Because that was the lesson Victor Crane and Marcus Whitmore and everyone who had tried to destroy them had never understood. Love was stronger than greed. Truth was stronger than lies, and light, no matter how hard you tried to suppress it, would always find a way to break through. Emma had taught them that. She was still teaching them every day, with every new thing she saw, and every question she asked, and every laugh that filled the halls of a mansion that had once been so silent. The reckoning was complete. Now came the reward. 12 years passed like water through open fingers, sometimes rushing, sometimes still, but always moving forward. Emma Hartwell stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the yellow dress she had chosen for today. Yellow had always been her favorite color, ever since that first moment when she pointed at a rose and told Claire it looked like sunshine. She was 18 now, tall and confident with her father's determined jaw and her mother's gentle eyes. The glasses she wore were thin and stylish, barely noticeable, a small reminder of everything she had overcome. "Emma," Claire's voice came from downstairs. "The car will be here in 20 minutes. I'm almost ready." Emma took one last look at herself, then reached for the small framed photograph on her dresser. It showed a woman with dark hair and a radiant smile holding a newborn baby wrapped in a pink blanket. Victoria Hartwell had been dead for 18 years, but Emma had grown up surrounded by her presence in photographs, in stories, in the way her father's voice softened whenever he spoke about her. "I wish you could be here today, Mom," Emma whispered. "I think you'd be proud." She set the photograph down and headed downstairs where Richard and Claire were waiting in the foyer. Richard was wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, but his tie was slightly crooked. It always was, and Claire was reaching up to straighten it. "Hold still," Claire said, laughing. "You'd think after all these years you'd learn to tie these properly." "I have people for that," Richard replied. "I just don't like using them." Emma grinned at the familiar scene. These two people had saved her life in every way that mattered. Her father, who had fought an empire to give her back her sight. And Claire, who had noticed what no one else could see, who had believed in her when she was just a silent child holding a teddy bear in the dark. "You both look amazing," Emma said. Richard turned and his eyes immediately filled with tears. "Look at you. My God, look at you. Dad, don't cry. You'll make me cry, and I spent an hour on this makeup. I can't help it. You're so beautiful. You look just like—" He stopped, unable to finish. "Like Mom." Richard nodded, wiping his eyes. "Exactly like her." Claire put her arm around Emma's shoulders. "She would be so proud of you. We all are." Today was Emma's high school graduation. But more than that, it was the day she would receive a special recognition from the Children's Resilience Foundation, an organization that had grown out of the scandal that had defined her early childhood. She had been invited to speak at their annual gala to share her story with an audience of hundreds, including survivors, advocates, and lawmakers who had worked to ensure that what happened to her would never happen to another child. The car arrived, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows, and the three of them climbed inside. Emma sat between Richard and Claire, holding both their hands as the city passed by outside the window. "Are you nervous?" Claire asked. "A little. I've never spoken to this many people before." "You'll be wonderful," Richard said. "You've been preparing for this your whole life." Emma smiled, but her mind was already drifting to the speech she had written. She had spent weeks crafting it, rewriting it, throwing entire drafts away, and starting over. How do you condense 18 years of pain and healing and love into 15 minutes? How do you explain what it means to see the world for the first time when you're 5 years old? How do you thank the people who gave you everything without dissolving into tears? She didn't have perfect answers to those questions, but she had her story. And today, she was going to share it. The graduation ceremony took place in the morning at a beautiful auditorium filled with proud families and nervous teenagers. Emma walked across the stage when her name was called, accepting her diploma with a steady hand and a bright smile. She could see her father and Claire in the third row, both of them crying openly, and she had to look away to keep from joining them. Afterward, there was a reception with punch and cookies and endless photographs. Emma's classmates hugged her and wished her well, many of them unaware of the full story of her childhood. She had kept that part of her life relatively private, not wanting to be defined by trauma. But tonight at the gala, she would finally speak openly about everything. "Ready for round 2?" her friend Madison asked, appearing at her elbow with a plate of cookies. "As ready as I'll ever be." "I still can't believe you're giving a speech in front of all those people. I would literally die." Emma laughed. "It's not that scary. I've faced scarier things." Madison didn't know the half of it. Almost no one did. but after tonight, they would. The gala was held at a grand hotel in Manhattan, in a ballroom that glittered with chandeliers and featured centerpieces of yellow roses, a detail Claire had quietly arranged. Emma walked in on her father's arm wearing a different dress. Now this one more formal, a deep blue that reminded her of the ocean she had finally seen on her 7th birthday. The room was packed. Politicians, celebrities, doctors, researchers, and families, so many families. Some of them had been affected by the same conspiracy that had stolen Emma's early years. Others had faced different challenges, but shared the same resilience. All of them had gathered to celebrate survival and to honor those who fought for justice. Emma recognized some faces from news coverage and documentaries. Rebecca Ashford Wu was there now in her 50s, her hair completely gray, but her eyes still sharp and determined. She had become a leading advocate for medical transparency and had testified before Congress multiple times. When she saw Emma, she crossed the room immediately. "Look at you," Rebecca said, taking Emma's hands. "The last time I saw you, you were this tiny thing who had just started seeing colors. Now you're all grown up." "I couldn't have done it without you," Emma said. "Without everything you risked to help us." Rebecca shook her head. "You saved yourself, sweetheart. We just opened the door. You walked through it." They talked for a few more minutes before the event organizers began guiding guests to their seats. Emma's table was near the front, reserved for honorees and their families. She sat between Richard and Claire, her hands folded in her lap, her heart beating faster as the program began. There were speeches from foundation leaders, testimonials from other survivors, a video presentation about the organization's work over the past decade. Emma watched and listened, drawing strength from every story, every face, every voice that refused to be silenced. Finally, the moment came. "And now," the Master of Ceremonies announced, "we are honored to welcome our keynote speaker." She was just 5 years old when she first saw light that had been deliberately stolen from her by people who valued profit over human life. Her father's fight for justice helped expose one of the largest pharmaceutical conspiracies in American history. And today, she stands before us as a testament to the power of love, perseverance, and truth. Please welcome Emma Hartwell. The applause was thunderous. Emma stood on shaking legs, accepting a hug from Claire and a kiss on the forehead from her father before walking to the podium. The spotlight was bright, and for a moment she couldn't see the audience at all, just a sea of darkness beyond the glare. She thought about the irony of that, how she had spent her first 5 years in darkness, and now here she was standing in light so bright it blinded her. She adjusted the microphone and began. "When I was 5 years old, I said my first word in almost 3 years. Do you know what it was?" She paused, letting the question hang in the air. "Light. I said, I think I saw a light. And then I said, Mommy." A murmur rippled through the audience. "I wasn't talking to my mother. She had died when I was just days old, killed in a helicopter crash that we now know was not an accident. I was talking to Claire, a woman who had come to our house as a maid, who had no medical training, no special credentials, no reason to suspect that anything was wrong with me. She was just someone who paid attention, someone who looked at a little girl everyone else had given up on and thought, something isn't right here." Emma found Claire's face in the audience. Claire was crying silently, her hand pressed over her heart. "My father believed I was blind. The doctors said I was blind. Everyone accepted it as fact. But Claire watched me turn toward windows when the light changed. She noticed my eyes following the movement they shouldn't have been able to see. She found the medication I had been given since birth, medication that was designed not to help me, but to suppress whatever natural vision I had." Emma's voice grew stronger as she continued. What she discovered led to the exposure of a criminal network that had experimented on children for decades. Doctors, pharmaceutical executives, financial backers, people who saw children not as human beings, but as test subjects. People who murdered parents who asked too many questions. People who thought they were untouchable because they had money and power and connections. She gripped the podium, steadying herself. They were wrong. They were brought down not by a team of investigators or a government task force, but by a grieving father and a woman who refused to look away. by witnesses who found the courage to speak after years of silence, by families who chose justice over safety. Emma took a deep breath. I'm standing here today because of love. My father's love for me drove him to fight when fighting seemed hopeless. Claire's love gave her the courage to question what everyone else accepted. The love of survivors like Rebecca Ashford Wu who risked everything to share their truth. Love is what saved me. Love is what saves all of us. The audience was utterly silent, hanging on her every word. I spent my first 5 years in darkness, but I don't remember the darkness. What I remember is the moment it ended. I remember Claire's face when I said I saw light. I remember my father crying when I touched his beard and told him it was gray. I remember the first time I saw the ocean and the sky and my own reflection in a mirror. Her voice cracked slightly. I remember thinking that the world was so beautiful and wondering why anyone would want to take that away from a child. She wiped her eyes and composed herself. The people who hurt me are in prison now. They will spend the rest of their lives paying for what they did. But the scars they left behind don't disappear with a verdict. There are still children out there who were affected by similar schemes. There are still families who don't know the truth about what happened to their sons and daughters. And there are still people in positions of power who would rather protect profits than protect children. Emma's voice rose with conviction. That's why organizations like this one matter. That's why we gather tonight, not just to celebrate what we've survived, but to commit ourselves to protecting those who haven't yet found their voice. Every child deserves to see the world. Every child deserves the truth. And every child deserves someone who will pay attention, who will ask questions, who will fight for them when they can't fight for themselves. She looked directly at Claire again. People often ask me when I first saw light. They expect me to talk about flashlights or sunshine or the moment the medication stopped. But the truth is the first light I ever saw didn't come from my eyes. It came from her heart. Claire was sobbing now and Richard had his arm around her, tears streaming down his own face. Claire Simmons came to our house looking for a job. She was running from her own grief. She had lost her baby daughter just weeks before. She had every reason to focus on her own pain, to do her work, and go home and not get involved. Instead, she looked at a little girl no one else could reach and decided that she mattered. She decided that I mattered. Emma's voice broke completely on the last words, but she pushed through. That's what love does. It looks at brokenness and sees possibility. It looks at darkness and imagines light. It refuses to accept that some children are beyond help, that some causes are beyond hope, that some battles are beyond winning. She stepped back from the podium, gathering herself for the final words. I am 18 years old today. I graduated from high school this morning. In the fall, I'm starting at the Rhode Island School of Design, where I'm going to study art. And last month, I had my first art exhibition, 15 paintings, inspired by my journey, each one named after a moment that changed my life. Emma smiled through her tears. The centerpiece of that exhibition is a painting of 3 people holding hands walking toward a sunrise. It's called The Light She Gave Me. It's dedicated to Claire the maid who discovered the truth, who became my guardian, who taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice. It's about showing up every single day and loving someone even when it's hard. She took one last breath. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you for fighting for children like me. And thank you for believing that light will always find a way to break through the darkness. The applause that followed was not just loud, it was overwhelming. People rose to their feet, many of them crying, many of them reaching for the people beside them. Emma stood at the podium, overwhelmed by the response, until Claire broke from the audience and rushed toward her. They embraced on the stage, holding each other tight, while the crowd continued to applaud. Richard joined them moments later, wrapping his arms around both of them, and the 3 of them stood together in the spotlight, a family forged not by blood, but by love and trial and unbreakable bonds. The gala continued late into the evening, filled with conversations and connections, and moments of profound human connection. Emma spoke with dozens of people who had been moved by her speech, including several young survivors who told her she had given them hope. I thought I was alone. One girl said, no older than 12. I thought no one would believe me about what happened, but now I know I can fight too." Emma hugged her and gave her a card with her contact information. "You're never alone, and if you ever need to talk, I'm here." By the time they returned home, it was nearly midnight. Emma was exhausted, but too energized to sleep. She sat in the kitchen with Richard and Claire drinking tea and processing everything that had happened. "I can't believe it's over," she said. "I've been thinking about this night for months, and now it's done." "It's not over," Richard said gently. "It's just beginning. You're going to do amazing things with your life, Emma. I've always known that." "We both have," Claire added. Emma looked at them, these two people who had shaped her entire existence. Her father, who had been broken by grief and found his way back to life. Claire, who had arrived as a stranger and become the closest thing to a mother Emma had ever known. "Can I tell you both something?" Emma asked. "Anything," Richard said. "I used to be angry. When I was younger, when I first understood what had been done to me, I was so angry I couldn't breathe sometimes. I hated Marcus Whitmore. I hated Victor Crane. I hated everyone who had been part of it." Claire reached across the table and took her hand. "But I'm not angry anymore," Emma continued. "And it's not because they got punished, although I'm glad they did. It's because being angry means giving them power over me. It means letting them live in my head, take up space in my heart. And I don't want that. I want to fill that space with better things, with art and love and hope and all the beautiful things I can see now." Richard's eyes were glistening again. "When did you get so wise? I learned from you, both of you." They sat together in comfortable silence for a long while, the kind of silence that exists only between people who truly know each other. Finally, Emma yawned and announced she was going to bed. "Big day tomorrow," she said. "I'm meeting with my art advisor to plan my portfolio." "The future starts now," Claire said, smiling. "It started a long time ago," Emma replied. "The day you walked into this house." She hugged them both goodnight and headed upstairs, leaving Richard and Claire alone in the kitchen. Richard looked at Claire, really looked at her, taking in the gray that had begun to appear in her hair, the lines that had formed around her eyes, the quiet strength that had never wavered in all the years they had been together. "I never thanked you properly," he said. "For what? For everything. For staying, for loving Emma, for loving me even when I was broken and lost and didn't know how to be human anymore." Claire smiled softly. "You never had to thank me. I got more than I gave. I came here looking for a distraction from my own grief, and I found a family. I found a daughter. I found—" She paused, her voice catching. "I found you." Richard stood and walked around the table to where Claire sat. He knelt beside her chair and took both her hands in his. "I love you," he said simply. "I don't say it enough, but I love you more than I know how to express." "I love you too." They kissed a gentle kiss full of years of shared struggle and triumph and quiet moments just like this one. "Thank you," Richard whispered against her lips, "for seeing the light in Emma when no one else could, and for bringing light back into my life when I thought I would live in darkness forever." Claire touched his face, her fingers tracing the lines of his jaw. "We brought it to each other. That's what love does." Upstairs, Emma lay in her bed, looking at the photograph of her mother one more time before setting it on the nightstand. Outside her window, the stars were bright, so many stars more than she could count, each one a point of light in the infinite darkness. She thought about everything she had survived. The years of blindness, the discovery of the truth, the trials and tribulations that had followed, and through it all the love that had carried her forward, her father's fierce protection, Claire's unwavering devotion, the support of strangers who became allies. She thought about the future stretching out before her art school, new experiences, a world full of colors and shapes and possibilities she was only beginning to explore. And she thought about the painting she had created for her exhibition, the one she had titled, "The Light She Gave Me." 3 figures holding hands walking toward a sunrise, their silhouettes dark against the brilliant glow of a new day. That was her life now. walking toward the light hand in hand with the people who loved her. Emma closed her eyes and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adventures, new opportunities to create and grow and become whoever she was meant to be. But tonight she was content to simply exist in this moment of peace. The darkness was behind her, the light was everywhere, and she could finally truly see. The story that began with a billionaire's daughter born into blindness had become something far greater, a testament to the power of paying attention, of questioning what everyone else accepts, of fighting for those who cannot fight for themselves. Claire Simmons had walked into a silent mansion looking for work and found a purpose. Richard Hartwell had nearly drowned in grief before discovering that love could pull him back to shore. And Emma, the child who sat alone in the dark, clutching a teddy bear, waiting for someone to notice, had become a young woman full of light and fire and unstoppable hope. They had faced pharmaceutical conspiracies and hired killers and anonymous threats. They had uncovered murder and exposed corruption and brought powerful men to justice. And through it all, they had held on to each other. That was the real miracle. Not that Emma could see, although that was miracle enough, but that three broken people had found each other and built something beautiful from the pieces of their pain. The mansion that had once felt like a tomb now rang with laughter and conversation and life. The walls that had witnessed so much darkness now held photographs of birthday parties and graduations and ordinary days made extraordinary by love. And in one corner of Emma's room, carefully framed and hanging in a place of honor, was a simple drawing she had made when she was 5 years old. Shaky lines, uneven shapes, nothing technically impressive. But it was her first. The first mark she had ever made on paper while seeing what she was creating. The first proof that the darkness could be beaten. Richard had never let her throw it away. He said it was the most valuable piece of art he had ever owned, worth more than all the masterpieces in all the museums in the world, because it represented something that couldn't be bought or sold. It represented hope. And hope, they had all learned, was the most powerful force in the universe. More powerful than greed, more powerful than fear, more powerful than any conspiracy or corporation or criminal network. Hope was what made Claire look closer when everyone else looked away. Hope was what made Richard fight when fighting seemed impossible. Hope was what kept Emma reaching for light even when she didn't know what light was. And hope was what would carry them forward into whatever came next. Together, always together. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. Thank you so much for staying with us through every twist and turn. If Emma's journey touched your heart, please leave a comment below and let us know. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next story. Until then, remember, sometimes the people who save us aren't heroes or experts. They're ordinary people who simply refuse to look away.